to all of you. It is indeed my pleasure to welcome you to IPI and to the now actually 11th annual Tryggvi Symposium on Fundamental Freedoms. And this year the topic is Human Rights Defenders, a Global Movement for Peace, organized as always in cooperation with the Norwegian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We are very honored to have with us here this morning a highly distinguished panel, including Ine, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Norway, sitting on my right-hand side, and also my very good friend, as is Khemaies, who is the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Tunisia, and Michel, an old colleague, who is the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, as you all know. We also are privileged to have with us Thomas Hughes, who is the Executive Director of Article 19, which is a human rights organization with a specific focus on the defense and promotion of freedom of expression and freedom of information worldwide. And last but not least, we also have with us Florence Giauco, who is the Special Envoy for the Global Alliance on National Human Rights Institutions, with the abbreviation GANHRI. And this year actually marks the 70th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the 20th anniversary of the UN Declaration on Human Rights Defenders. It is important, as we celebrate these anniversaries, to reflect on the progress made regarding protecting human rights and human rights defenders and the challenges that remain. The UN Declaration of Human Rights Defenders tells us that we all have a role to fulfill as human rights defenders and emphasizes that there is a global human rights movement that involves every one of us. In November of last year, 76 countries, including Norway and Tunisia, co-sponsored the Human Rights Defenders UN Consensus Resolution in consultation with civil society. The resolution was unanimously adopted by the UN General Assembly. This resolution recognized, and I quote, the substantial role that human rights defenders can play in supporting efforts to strengthen conflict prevention, peace and sustainable development, including in the context of the implementation of the 2030 Agenda, unquote. This year's symposium will seek to identify ways the international community can further promote the positive, important, legitimate and necessary role of human rights defenders, and how this work helps to create a world where sustainable peace is possible. The biographies of the distinguished speakers are in your program. And after the panel presentations, we will also hear from some of our special guests, including Mukisa Kitui, who is the Secretary General of the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, and Larisa Galadza, who is the Director of the Peace and Stabilization Operations Program of Canada. It is a pleasure to have you all with us here today, and we are looking very much forward to your interventions. But before we begin, may I remind you to please silence your cell phones, though we encourage you to tweet about the event using, but also for sharing with us some very promising numbers and also some very shocking numbers on the state of affairs in the field at hand. Before I turn to the next presenter, let me remind you that I will open the floor for questions and answers following the presentations. If you are joining us online, you are welcome to tweet in your questions and comments. And we will now hear from Khemaies, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Tunisia. Khemaies, you have the floor.
Thank you, Terry, for your kind invitation. Madam Minister, Madam High Commissioner for Human Rights, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it gives me a great pleasure to take part this morning in this 11th edition of the annual symposium Tryggvi entitled Human Rights Defenders, a Global Movement for Peace. I would like to thank the International Peace Institute and Her Excellency the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Kingdom of Norway for selecting a topic of particular relevance to our collective efforts for achieving sustainable peace. As we celebrate the 70th anniversary of Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the 20th anniversary of the United Nations Declaration on Human Rights Defenders, let me reiterate our strong commitment to these two landmark declarations. Guided by the spirit of our new constitutions, adopted in 2014, and which embodies progressive rights and freedoms, we stress our determination to continue our efforts to achieve a well-functioning national human rights system and to promote and strengthen state structure and mechanism for the promotion and protection of human rights, thus creating a safe and enabling environment for all those who engage in defending and safeguarding human rights and in contributing to peace and sustainable development. In this regard, Tunisia welcomes the increased focus on human rights defenders, as we believe that their work is essential for the advancement of human rights, democracy, and the rule of law. We are fully engaged in supporting initiatives for protecting human rights defenders. Thus, our continuous strong support to Norway's annual resolution on human rights defenders in the Human Rights Council in Geneva and in the General Assembly in New York, as well as our partnership with Ireland in introducing the first ever resolution on the Human Rights Council on civil society space, and with Sweden in initiating the first ever resolution on Human Rights Council on freedom of expression in the Internet. Building a bridge between these three resolutions, covering such crucial dimensions of human rights, demonstrates Tunisia's multidimensional approach to human rights designed to protect and promote all fundamental freedoms and human rights, including economic, social, and cultural rights. It is also a testimony of our appreciation of the role and contribution of human rights defenders and civil society actors. The role of civil society is particularly important. The award of 2015 Nobel Prize to the Tunisian civil society, represented by the National Dialogue Quartet, is in recognition of the civil society role and its contribution in promoting dialogue and political solution by building consensus across political groups. Partnership with civil society has become instrumental in our policies and programs for achieving inclusive and sustainable development, which is, in our view, a multi-stakeholder and comprehensive endeavor that encompasses public, private, and civil society actors. Comprehensive because disparities and inequality within and among nations could lead to violation of human rights and to undermining development, thus threatening peace and stability. This was the essence of the Tunis imperative used by the former Human Rights High Commissioner, Nevi Pillay. Peace and growth are not sustainable if they don't reap benefits to all nations, region, gender, ages, social status, etc. This inextricable link between respect for human rights, sustainable peace and development is a cornerstone of the 2030 development agenda, with its main and major objective of leaving no one behind. In our view, this goal cannot be fully achieved without the active contribution of civil society actors, including human rights defenders. Hundreds of thousands of people around the world strive to defend fundamental rights, often in the face of threat coming from extremist and terrorist groups, as well as from organized crime. Our task is to protect them and create the enabling and safe environment for them to fulfill their task. We in Tunisia, we are determined to do so and to safeguard all the tenets to allow our young democracy to thrive. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Khamiz. Again, inspiring and promising words and very constructive commitments from Tunisia. And I think Tunisia's efforts in this field is highly, highly commendable. Last year, we had Prince Zaid here sitting where you are sitting now, and I said that he was the most courageous man in the world. And I think in order to take on that job, you have to be the most courageous woman in the world, because this is asking to be criticized left, right, and center. You have to stand in the bully pulpit and criticize leaders in this world. So maybe I should ask you, how did you dare to take the job? You have the floor, Michelle.
Thank you, distinguished President of the International Peace Institute, my fellow panelists, Excellencies, colleagues, and friends. Well, first of all, I want to thank the government of Norway for the strong support for human rights, because, as the Minister mentioned, human rights is being pushed back, and I think we need to, all of us, don't give up and push back to put the human rights issue in the agenda, in the multilateral system in a stronger way. So thank you so much for that, Madam Minister. And I am delighted that this is one of my, first engagement in terms of that I'm only 3 weeks in the office, and so as High Commissioner for Human Rights. But I've been here in many capacities. I've been here as President of the Republic. I've been here with the Prime Minister of Norway, discussing about foreign fighters some years ago, and I've been as UN Women Executive Director too, discussing. So it's great to be in this new role. So we are here in memory of Trygve Lie, the first UN Secretary General. And it's interesting because it was during his mandate that the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was drafted and adopted 70 years ago. This great document with this magnificent language proclaims that, and it has been already reminded us, that all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. Furthermore, and this is too often forgotten, the Universal Declaration lays out the very practical and detailed steps which lay the path away from conflict and deprivation, leading to the effective realization of human rights. And I'm deeply honored to have received the mandate to protect and promote human rights across the world on this, the 70th anniversary of this great promise by all states to the peoples. The Universal Declaration is a living document, a constant and universal commitment to every human being. As Trygve Lie himself said, and I quote, "The Declaration is helping greater numbers of people all the time, to be more articulate and effective in demanding and securing observance of the right." Excellencies, it was during the 50th anniversary of the Universal Declaration that the General Assembly adopted the Declaration of Human Rights Defenders, officially known as Declaration on the Right and Responsibility of Individuals, Groups and Organs of Society to Promote and Protect Universally Recognized Human Rights and Fundamental Freedom. It's yesterday in activity celebrating the 70th anniversary of the Universal Declaration for Human Rights. There were other two predecessors, so Louise Arbour and Mary Robinson. And Mary Robinson was telling us that she was a High Commissioner when 50 years ago the Declaration of Human Rights Defenders was approved. This declaration grants every person the right, and I quote again, individually and in association with others, to promote and to strive for the protection and realization of human rights and fundamental freedoms at the national and international levels, as we have heard. It brought new recognition to civil society activists and made it clear that the effective implementation of human rights principles and law very much depends on the work of activists and civil society groups. It was a commitment to protect human rights defenders and the rights to freedom of assembly and association. It was also a commitment to ensure freedom of information, to acknowledge the rights of groups and individuals to publish, discuss, and draw public attention to human rights-related matters, the right to develop new human rights ideas, and to advocate their acceptance, and their right to participate in public affairs. At that time, the late Kofi Annan was the Secretary General. He described the core of the Declaration of Human Rights Defenders in these terms, and I quote, "When the rights of human rights defenders are violated, all of our rights are put in jeopardy, and all of us are made less safe." 20 years after the Declaration of Human Rights Defender, and 70 years after the adoption of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, we would say progress has been achieved. Across the globe, the power of civil society participation has underpinned tremendous progress in human dignity, economic and social well-being, and a result of openness and inclusiveness, more effective governance. Many historic breakthroughs have been made in numerous countries to advance towards greater equality and freedom for women, members of ethnic, religious, and caste minorities, and many other groups, including LGBTI communities and people with disabilities. Heroic men and women have stepped forward to claim rights for their fellow human beings, and many have succeeded. In numerous countries, strong traditions have taken root of ordinary people joining together in common causes for the betterment of all. In their voices, we hear the Universal Declaration of Human Rights proclaim the will of the people should be the basis of the authority of government. Nevertheless, there are some dark clouds. In recent years, we have seen space for civil society closing in a wide range of countries on every continent. Government has imposed restrictions on the ability of civil society groups to operate or to receive funding, or have failed in their obligations to include, recognize, and protect defenders whose work and person is attacked. Human rights defenders are falsely vilified as traitors and terrorists. They face smear and disinformation campaign, harassment and intimidation, and this is particularly the case for women and for LGBTI human rights defenders, who often suffer attacks of sexualized nature. Defenders are threatened by officials, their offices raided and ransacked. They may be also arbitrarily detained or left unprotected to face physical assault, gender-based violence, or even murder. We're seeing violent crackdowns on peaceful demonstrations and harsh prison sentences for the exercise of fundamental rights. We're also witnessing widespread efforts to silence, delegitimize, and specifically target women's human rights defenders simply because they're women or because of their efforts to promote gender equality. Digital technologies are being used to further restrict the civic space in many countries, enabling intrusive practices which attack the right to privacy. In contradiction with international human rights law, human rights defenders are being tracked, facilitating their arrest or attacked by private actors. Demands are also made on private communication platforms to transmit confidential information about people reporting on human rights violations. Online campaigns against women human rights defenders aim to damage their credibility as advocates, diminish the power of their voices, and restrict the already limited public space in which women's activists can mobilize and make a difference. In a number of countries, even the individuals and groups who assist the human rights works of the United Nations are openly under attack. And the Assistant Secretary General for Human Rights recently reported on his report of reprisals, acts of serious cruelty against those who dare to cooperate with us, incommunicado detention, torture and ill treatment, prolonged solitary confinement, and even killing. We have also received reports of sexual assault, threats of rape, online smear campaigns, intrusive physical searches, humiliating and degrading treatment, and travel bans intended to block people from having access to United Nations bodies. The magnitude and scope of these reprisals against people who cooperate with human bodies is far-reaching, and their impact is visible in countries where our staff often encounter people too afraid to speak with them. The breadth of attacks of human rights defenders across societies is overwhelming. By shutting down the active voices of the people, this assault on rights profoundly undermines the state's ability to respond to important concerns and erodes the pillars of sustainable development and peace. People's right to claim their rights is essential in and of itself, but it is also a driver of numerous other benefits. The meaningful participation of civil society in decision-making is more likely to ensure the fair distribution of resources. And I, as former president, I can say when you you work with the people, your policies are more sustainable because they take in consideration their people concerns, and you look for solutions to that. It is essential to implementing the agenda for sustainable development, and this holds true for every area: health, housing, water, and of course climate change. The best solution will be found when those affected are meaningfully involved in identifying the best way forward, even if they can provide feedback once implementation has begun. Because, you know, papers can accept beautiful policies, but sometimes papers don't reflect reality. Activism is also a strong driver of confidence in important institutions and of access to fundamental goods. In this sense, it can act as a powerful antidote to extremism. We need to hammer this message home. Criticism and debate do not constitute terrorism. They are a preventive tool against the rise of violent extremist groups. So what can we do at this time when fundamental rights are so sorely under pressure? There is a way forward, like my dear minister has said, and it is to fight back. We need to stand up for human rights. We need to insist on spaces of inclusion and safety for civil society, including all human rights defenders, and of course, journalists. Many journalists have been murdered in these years. We need to safeguard the lives and the work of people across the world, not only in our own societies, who are struggling to shape a world of greater equality, greater peace, greater dignity and well-being. We need to speak out for fundamental freedoms. We need to counter the false and negative narrative that stigmatize human rights defenders as enemies, and remind officials and public constituencies alike that there is nothing more patriotic than fighting for the public good. We need to help defenders and activists join up in networks to defend the space for their activity. We need to build bridges to widen the constituency for human rights. We need to encourage businesses, including technology companies, to play a larger role in protecting the work of defenders, because public freedoms are good for the people but also good for business, and we need to build that business case. We need more effective accountability efforts at national, regional, and international levels. We need them to take into account the experiences and voices of women defenders and others